with me this week are Karen Lindsay, editor of Liberal Democrat Voice, and the SNP's former head of communications turned communications consultant. That's a mouthful, Kevin Pringle. Kevin, you were there during the last independence referendum. If you were still there, what would you be saying to the Scottish Government? Would you say go for a second referendum next year, or would you be saying hold your horses?
I think another referendum is, as the First Minister said, increasingly likely. I think it's probably unavoidable. In terms of the result of the European referendum, the fact that it was such a differential result across the UK, the fact that that very scenario was included in the SNP manifesto just last year, Scotland being taken out of the European Union.
Would you go for it, even if the polls were where they are now?
Yes, two reasons. One, the polls where they are now are, let's say, around where they were at the point of the referendum in 2014. But to begin at 45% is obviously very, very different to 2014, where the Yes campaign began at about 30%.
The counter to that is to say, well, that's because at the beginning of the 2014 campaign, a lot of people hadn't made up their minds. It's a bit more polarised now.
I think it is more polarised, but it's also probably more fluid than some people think. There's actually been a shift, as the polls indicate, in both directions, in actual fact. Some people have gone from no to yes in the aftermath of the European referendum. Some have gone from yes to no. My own view is I think it will be much easier to get people who have gone from yes to no back again, if you like, the stray yesers, to get them back. And even if that's all that happened, then the referendum result, if there was to be another one, would actually be yes. I think another point I would make is that I think the framing of the referendum will be in a post-Brexit situation, but I think what Nicola Sturgeon would like to do is to say that the referendum is not about Brexit as such, but is about putting Brexit in that wider context of the democratic deficit that Scotland faces within the UK.
Because one
example.
issue is that you know, the point Kenny McCaskill has been making is that, you know, a lot of yesers, whether they were SNP voters or not, voted to leave the European Union. He argues not just there shouldn't be another referendum at the moment, he argues that when there is one, you don't make it over Europe because you've got to win over previous yes voters who also voted leave.
That's correct, but I think that will be possible because what Brexit is an extreme example of the democratic deficit. The fact that since 2010 there's been a UK government with the support of just one member of Parliament in Scotland. If you look at that, the English equivalent of that would be to be governed, for England to be governed with a party that has the support of 9 MPs out of 533. Obviously ridiculous and could never happen.
Sure, but I think that's the result of an election system which you don't support.
Well,
it's only because of first past the post that the SNP have got so many.
It's the reality of the position that Scotland finds itself in. So I think that broader democratic deficit territory is a very fertile one to deliver a future yes vote, should there be another referendum. Karen
Lindsay, these reports this morning that Liberal Democrats, among others, are looking at putting amendments should the Supreme Court decide that there will have to be legislation on Article 50. Is that presumably something that you think might show some promise, or do you think that the Conservatives will just dismiss it?
Well, I think it's important to do, but what I really don't think is that the answer to the answer to Tory nationalism is SNP nationalism. I think the SNP and the Liberal Democrats and other people in Parliament should be working together to secure a referendum on the Brexit deal, because I think that is the best way of making sure that the whole UK stays in the single market.
What did you make, by the way, of a slightly odd tactic Mike Russell was saying, we'll put forward lots of amendments to the bill to trigger Article 50, but we'll vote against it anyway?
Well, we obviously need to see how it shapes out. But I think it would be
a rather odd way of proceeding, isn't it?
It would be quite...
Please vote for my amendment, but I'll be voting against the bill.
Well, let's see what happens in the House of Commons. But I think the reality of it is that these amendments would be unlikely to be successful. But I think there's obviously a very strong democratic position for the SNP MPs at Westminster to base their case on for just refusing to vote for Article 50, which is to say that obviously Scotland was 62%
Can they just be completely rejected? I mean, it's not impossible, Karen Lindsay, that a sufficient number of Conservatives might actually vote for some of these amendments. Well, after all, a majority of Conservative MPs were for staying in the European Union.
I think that's true. The problem is see what Labour MPs do. I mean, the Labour Party is just... I mean, they're not providing any opposition whatsoever. If they're just saying, oh, we'll just vote for Article 50, whatever. And that is just so wrong. If you had that wide kind of working together throughout the House of Commons, we could really make some changes.
But what Labour aren't here to defend themselves, but I think one of the points they would make to you is that, look, just calling for another referendum and the outcome of the negotiations is just ignoring the referendum result. I mean, you criticise the SNP for ignoring the result of the independence referendum, but you're doing exactly the same with the Brexit referendum.
Not at all, because we actually had no idea what Brexit would look like.
But how is that any different from the SNP saying, oh, well, we had no idea that Scotland would vote to stay in the EU and the rest of Britain wouldn't? I mean, a referendum result is a referendum result. You either respect it or you don't.
Yeah, you respect that the UK voted for a departure, but didn't vote for the destination, didn't vote for how it would leave, and the whole.
But that's the same as the SNP saying
Scotland voted.
No, but that's exactly the same as the SNP saying Scotland voted to stay in the UK. But we didn't know about that there would be a European referendum and Scotland would vote to stay in the EU, so therefore that invalidates the result of the referendum.
I mean,
your argument is precisely the same.
You cannot accuse the SNP of not telling us what independence would have looked like. Everyone got this great big house brick full of their entire prospectus. We didn't have that from the Leave campaign. And what Theresa May has done is chosen the most extreme version of Brexit on the waferest thin of majority. And that is just so wrong. I think if people need to have a vote on exactly what that Brexit looks like. And that is really
the
democratic.
SNP would support? I mean, obviously the SNP is saying, look, if we don't get what we want, we might have another independence referendum. We will have another independence referendum. That's one thing, but it's entirely a different thing to say, you know, there should be a referendum right across the UK on the results of the negotiations.
I don't know what position the SNP would take on that, but I think I would take Karen's point on that. The difference between the independence referendum, where the definition of what independent Scotland would look like was provided in that 670-odd document that everybody had available or got a summary of, and that was all provided before the referendum. In actual fact, all of the definition of what Brexit is going to look like has come after the vote. So there is, in that sense, a case, certainly a case to consider the issue of another referendum on the grounds that none of the definition was there when people went into the polling stations. And indeed, many, many leading Leave campaigners said explicitly that voting Leave was not about leaving the single European market. Dan Hannan, you know, who's been pursuing Brexit for decades, I think, made a point of saying that, you know, the UK would stay in the single European market. And that's the opposite of what's happening. So I think when the opposite of what was said would happen is actually about to come about, then there is a case to consider that again.
I'm not sure there's a strong case because with no disrespect to Dan Hannan, but just because Dan Hannan said something.
Well, many people said that, and they were at pains to say, oh no, leaving the European Union is not about leaving the single... And if you look at the Tory party manifesto, for example, in 2015, it said in terms that they were absolutely in favour of Britain remaining in the single European market. So there were many indications out there that Leave was not about leaving the single market. We've just heard, obviously, in Theresa May's speech last week, that's absolutely what it's about. And there, of course, you come into the issue of the fact that that's the ground upon which the SNP has chosen to rest the bulk of its case, that Scotland should remain in that single market, and the same goes for Northern Ireland. 2 out of the 4 parts of the UK voted to remain, so that ought to be taken into account in terms of shaping the nature of Brexit.
Karen, we can't end this programme without giving you an opportunity to express your undying admiration for Donald Trump.
I mean, I think actually, there is a cause for optimism, though. I think the marches that we saw yesterday, I think, are going to bring people who have never been involved in politics into trying to get a stake in the future to try and fight against what he is doing. I mean, already we've seen how he has just torn up all the stuff on Obamacare, on healthcare, on climate change.
Okay, we really are out of time. Quick comment on Trump. Tell us what you think of what he's done since the inauguration.
Well, it's been all about Trump, hasn't it? I mean, one point I'd make is that I think it may be a mistake for Theresa May to be the first there, because I think she's going there when a Trump presidency is still very, very raw, controversial, people rightly marching in the streets against it.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both. That's all from us this week. I'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, from all of us in the programme, goodbye.